In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use the Slack bot that I built. This Slack bot will report back on IP addresses mentioned in messages. It'll give security information about the IP address. This video, I'm going to demonstrate how to use the bot and a little walkthrough of the code. To get started, we're going to clone the repo. Okay, now we're in the repo. We need to import our requirements. To do that, we're going to make a virtual environment. And now we're going to run pip install the requirements. The main code that we want to look at is the code in the IP bot folder. Three main folders: app.py, which has the Slack code, lookup.py, which has a code to look up information about an IP address, and then stats.py helps us render a nice string, which includes the stats about the IP addresses. To get started, let's look in app.py. Real quick, we need some environment variables. Specifically, we need a Slack bot token, a Slack sign, a key secret. To make it easy, you can just create a file called .env, and then this library right over here, the .env, will automatically import it for you. So we'll do that in a second. And then it's relatively simple. This function will listen out for any message in a Slack channel that contains the regex of an IP address. And if it does find it, it'll save it. That'll save each match. And here we'll loop through each one of those matches. Say, the message has multiple IP addresses in it. And then for each IP address, it'll use the lookup function. It'll look up that IP, which returns a string containing information about that IP, and then the function just says that, which is how the Slack bolt works. Say we'll just put it back in the channel. Lastly, when we start the file, it starts the app. It creates a local server on port 3000. This will be important for a bit later. Next folder is lookup. Once again, we need environment variable for VirusTotal, which is the site that will give us information about the IP. So we need to load this variable. Again, using the .env library, we get our response, we decode it. We check up using the built-in IP address module if it's a private IP, if it's within the private range. If it is, then we just return a string saying that it's a private network. Otherwise, we try taking the response and we try indexing into it. If we get a proper response, a proper IP address, so then we'll have different information. For instance, we'll get the country code of the IP address. And then once we have the country code, we can use the PyCountry library to create a country object, which will contain more information, like the full name of the country, not just the code, and also the country flag and emoji, which is nice and cute. Lastly, the response will contain like an analysis report containing the sum of a whole bunch of reports, what they found, if it's malicious or harmful, things like that. So it'll sort of sum up how many reports found it harmful, how many reports found it malicious. And to take that information and turn it into a nice string, we use our pretty stat function. And then we just sort of return all that together. Something like the IP address originates from the country flag, the country name, and the stat string. Otherwise, return an error message. Okay. Now that we know about the variables, we want to basically create a file called .env containing these variables with the proper keys. Okay, let's clear the terminal, and we should have created the .env like that. Very good. The last thing I want to show you is the stats.py. Of course, we use our favorite Vim editor. This uses a really cool library called Inflect. What Inflect does, it can take multiple words and put them into a proper sentence. You know, if you have, let's say, 3 things, you have the first thing, the first thing, the second thing, and the third thing. You want to get that and in there. What if you have 4 things? So you want the and to be between the third and fourth thing. And what if it's dynamic? You don't know beforehand. The Inflect library really helps us. In our case, we don't know exactly the stats, how many different reports. If 0 reports find it malicious, we don't need to include that information. So we don't know exactly what we need, and that's what we use that library. So first of all, we sort the different stats. We want the stat. We want the reports. Let's say if the most reports found them malicious, we want that first. Then once we sort it, we get rid of the reports that have 0 reports. If 0 reports found them malicious, we don't need to include that information. Moving down to line 10, we create a list in order to keep like the different reports. If it's the first report, we want to specify in a string that, let's say, 36 reports have found it. Let's say it's malicious, right? And then every other report, we just want to say, 35 found it harmful, 35 found this. And once we have that information in our list, the p.join, which is the Inflect engine, will join it into a nice string, a properly formatted string. Okay. Now that we're done with that, it's time to get our server running. So we're gonna just run the Python code in app.py, which starts a server, a local server called Bolt App, which is the name of the Slack Python stuff. It created a development server. Now, this is only running locally. How do we listen to a message happening in Slack? So on the Slack dashboard on the website, you can sign up for certain events. In our case, we're signing up for message events. Anytime a message happens, it's an event. And what Slack will do, it'll forward that event. Well, it'll create a post request to your server. Being that our server is a local development server, we need a public-facing server to listen for those requests and to forward to the local server. For that, we're going to use ngrok. We're going to use the protocol HTTP, and we're going to run it on our local server. In other words, what we're saying is we're asking ngrok to give us a public URL, which we have right here. And what it is doing is it's forwarding it to our local server at port 3000, which is where the app is listening in. And if you have this public IP, you need to go to the Slack app dashboard and sign up for an events happening in your Slack channel, and tell Slack to forward it to this IP, which we've done. And this is the first one. What Slack will do is it'll check that it's indeed getting forwarded. So it'll create a post at Slack.events. If we go to our development server, we see that there was a post request, and that was Slack verifying that it works. So now we have everything running. It's time to go hop into Slack and see it in action. So here we are in Slack Messenger. We can really just start throwing in IP addresses into the chat box. So let's say I was writing to a friend of mine. I was saying, here is the first IP, and the second one is okay. We have a message that has mentions two different IP addresses. And remember, we want the bot to pick up on those and to give us reports on each one of those. Okay, so right away, boom, IP bot kicks in and tells us that the first IP address originates from Spain. 7 reports have found it harmless, 11 undetected, 7 malicious, and 2 suspicious. And notice how at the end of the string, there's an and there's commas and all that stuff, all that good stuff. And then the second IP originates from the United States, and 93 reports have found it harmless. And that's it. There's no and, there's no commas, because there's only the other reports are just 0, and like we saw in the code earlier, it just ignores it all. Notice that we have the emoji flag. That's thanks to the PyCountry library. You can just you can try typing in an EIP address, and if it's a valid address, you'll get a response. There you go. One last thing, which is interesting, if you type in a local IP address, the ones that's reserved for local networks, the bot will tell us, hey, that's used for private networks. And there you have it. Here you have it all in action. If we go back to our terminal, you'll see all the post events happening in our server, and as well over here in ngrok. Yeah, that's all. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like it. Please give it a thumbs up. If you think the code is really cool, please give it a star on GitHub. And thank you very much for watching.